Okay, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is actually our first webinar in a series which focuses on sustainability, and where better to start than the topic, how to begin your sustainability journey. My name is Helen Parker. I'm a director in the Mazars management consulting team, and I specialise in strategy and change management. I'm going to be your host for this morning's webinar, and I'm joined by Chris Fuggle, who is our Global Head of Sustainability here at Mazars. And I'm also joined by Giles Bradford, who is the Head of Sustainability at Bradfords Building Supplies, which is a 250-year-old family-owned business. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Hopefully you're all familiar with Zoom, but we have a Q&A box down at the bottom. If you have any questions for either myself or Chris or Giles, then feel free to pop that into the Q&A box, and we have left some time at the end in order to address those questions. If you're watching on LinkedIn, please add any questions to the comment box, and we are recording today's session and we will send this out to you afterwards. And of course, please feel free to share this with any of your colleagues that may be interested. Okay, so let's get started. So at the end of last year, Mazars released a report called Sustainability, Where Are You on Your Journey? And today we're going to be sharing some insights from this report, but also hearing some really practical tips, particularly from Giles, on how he got Bradfords onto their sustainability journey. So you can see here on the screen, we've got a QR code. Please feel free to hover your phone over the QR code, and that'll take you directly to a copy of the report. We'll just leave it up for the next sort of 30 seconds to allow you to follow the link. So just whilst people are following the link, Chris, it would be good, perhaps as a bit of a scene setter, just to understand a bit better on some of the terminology that's used in this area. So we hear about sustainability, we hear about ESG. Perhaps you could clarify, are these things different? Are they the same?
Morning, Helen. I think it's fine to use them as interchangeable terms, really, and certainly in the UK, they seem to be used interchangeably a lot. But sustainability is the concept of what you're doing with your business is sustainable for the environment and for society into the future. Whereas for ESG, it's really the way that we look at the business and examine those concepts under environmental, social, and governance. So fine to continue using them interchangeably, but really ESG is more the lens that we look at the business and seeing whether it's being sustainable or not.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying, Chris. And Giles, perhaps before we jump into, I've got lots of questions for both of you. Before we jump in there, perhaps could you give us a bit of an introduction to Bradfords to set the scene, please?
Yeah, delighted. Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Helen. So Bradfords Building Supplies, we do what it says on the tin. So we're a builder's merchant supplying everything you need to build a house. As you said, Helen, we were 250 years old in 2020. It's quite a year to be 250 years old, but we came out the other side looking good, so that was great. We've got 46 sites across the southwest. We've got a delivery fleet of over 200 vehicles, 900 employees, and a turnover of about 230 million. And of course, our world is the built environment. So sustainability is pretty big in that place, particularly around the environmental side. So hopefully that gives us sort of introductions to where we're at.
Perfect, thanks for that. And perhaps just to pick your brain a little bit on the terminology. I know when we were prepping for this session, I really liked what you said around what sustainability means for Bradfords and how you've communicated that. Would you be happy to share that with everyone today?
Yeah, absolutely, not a problem at all. So the dictionary definition of sustainability is simply enduring success. And I guess sitting here as, a Bradford from Bradford's a 250-year heritage, there's something kind of ingrained in what we're about that says, well, actually it is all about enduring success. And I think it's really important for everybody to kind of maintain that as the North Star for what sustainability is really all about, and around adding business value. Yes, we want to do some we want to make sure that we're maintaining or improving social and natural capital, But fundamentally, you can only do that if you're improving your own business value, and you've therefore got the resource, the money, the investment to be able to do so. So I think that's really important. And I know Chris used the phrase lens. Absolutely. I think my business is bored of the number of times where I use my hands and say, there's your strategy, that's the financial lens, and all we're doing is replacing another lens on top that says, yes, let's put the ESG, the sustainability lens on top and test that strategy. Someone said to me recently on a conversation, interestingly, about carbon offsetting, but anyway, they said sustainability is not a strategy, sustainability is an outcome.
Very good. Thanks a lot for that, Giles, and hopefully lots of things that people can steal as they start to talk to their own staff and colleagues about these concepts. Okay, so let's go to some questions. So initially, Chris, so Mazars released the report end of last year. It was titled Sustainability, Where Are You on Your Journey? Perhaps you could give us a bit more insight into the report. What was the purpose of it, and what does it contain?
Yeah, sure. So we were just very conscious that obviously sustainability and ESG is talked about a huge amount. We know that so many firms, large and small, are quite near the beginning of their journey, maybe a bit skeptical in terms of whether it's for them, whether it's relevant for them, because it's not just about carbon. So we thought we'd pull together this report. It's got some insights from our practitioners around the world. It takes a deeper dive into the energy sector as an example, the consumer sector as an example, and the financial sector as an example. We also talk about some of the regulations that are coming on both sides of the Atlantic, because with longer supply chains, that could obviously impact the UK. It's not just about what's happening in the UK. And then finally, we have a C-suite survey every year where we check the pulse of over 1,000 C-suite and business owners, and we've got quite a few ESG questions there. So one of the key things we wanted to find out, well, what were the drivers for businesses to invest in sustainability, so that we could understand, is it just regulation, or are there some real business drivers in there? So that's the purpose of the report.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And perhaps now to you, Giles. So Chris just mentioned around those drivers that are there. He mentioned regulation. He talked about other business drivers. What were the drivers that prompted you and Bradford to start your sustainability journey?
So I think three pieces to answer this question, and I'll keep them short. The first one, I think, is around that concept that Bradford's is an enduring part of the Southwest landscape in the UK, and therefore, we have a brand that is well known, that has a reputation to preserve. So doing the right thing, and of course sustainability and the framework within sustainability certainly challenges you to test that. But I think if I return to the fact that we exist very much in the built environment industry, in the merchant sector, and certainly over the past 2.5 years, there have been some enormous numbers thrown around certainly the environmental impact of what the built environment, the contribution of the built environment to the environmental impact. 40% of the carbon footprint of the UK comes from construction. Some huge numbers, and so therefore you couldn't ignore that. As part of that industry, there was a right, guys, what are we doing about this? How are we going to contribute? And I think there was also a kind of very proactive realization that it wasn't a case of should we, it was a case of when should we. That we were going to have to. So I think that's maybe an understanding that there was that there's some business value around getting it right and doing it early and being proactive about it. So I guess that's the carrot, and then the stick. I'm very honest here, was around the banking facilities we have, where our bank turned around and said, where's your, and I'm going to do the interchangeable thing here, where's your ESG? Which isn't a phrase I particularly like, but where's your ESG? And if you guys want to continue to have the facilities that we provide, then you have to demonstrate that you are nailing your sustainability agenda. So significant stick there in a business that wants to continue to grow and develop and improve.
Okay, thanks for that, Giles. And Chris, maybe turning to you. Giles explained some of those drivers that were there for Bradford, and particularly in the construction sector. Does that correlate with what you're seeing in other companies, perhaps in other sectors?
Yeah, so it was quite surprising, I guess, maybe because at our heart, we're a firm of auditors and accountants originally. I was expecting compliance to come up as a big driver for why people were doing this, and maybe a few years ago it would have been more about compliance, at least outside of the UK, because there's not actually that much compliance requirements in the UK around sustainability. But as Giles kind of alluded to, I mean, the number one, and they're very close, but brand and reputation, client and consumer expectations, obviously societal changes, and it just being critical to long-term growth. So obviously if you can't get funding, then you can't grow necessarily. So those top three, very much business drivers, and then compliance and government and regulator expectations coming further down the line, and as you can see, investor expectations in there as well. So there's quite a multitude of factors in there, and also what was really surprising was the speed of change. So whilst we had 75% of companies that replied saying that they were going to increase their investment over the next 12 months, that's a 27-point increase on the same question the previous year. So there's not many questions. In fact, this was the highest change in the whole survey. You don't get many questions where you have a 27-point swing. And in terms of having a transformation of their sustainability strategy, that was an 18-point swing on the previous year. So a multitude of factors and a significant change in speed in terms of ESG investment.
Great, thanks for that. And Giles, when you started on your journey, obviously we've understood now what some of those drivers were. Where do you start? You talked about the construction industry. You talked about, sustainability must impact or potentially impact every single part of your business. So where did you start? How did you decide which topics to focus on, or which topics, in terms of your strategy and that lens that you talked about? How did you apply the lens? Where did you look?
So I think there's an interesting bit of context to put in before I talk about the topics that we addressed. So by definition, Bradfords at the turnover that we're at and the number of people that we employ is a big business by technical definition in the UK. But in actual fact, we're not that big and we've got limited resource. And so certainly my brief from my CEO and the board was, we need to make this as light touch as possible, and I don't want to make that trivializing doing sustainability at Bradfords. And I'll explain what that light touch means more in a minute when I've talked about the topics we chose. But it's an important bit of context that says where can we have the most impact for? I don't want to say minimum effort because that sounds awful, but you know what I mean. Where can we have the most impact for the least investment? So we put that aside for a second, and that's absolutely what we did when we did our materiality assessment. So we knew the heavy lifting all had to happen at the front end. So we've got to get this materiality assessment right. We've got to get those topics right, because unless we get those right, we'll continue doing heavy lifting beyond, whereas actually what we want is the light touch. So what did we do? We did, I think, what is probably a fairly standard process in terms of assessing what was most important, what had the biggest impact. So initially a survey out to our stakeholders, so that's suppliers, that's the bank, that's our shareholders, our customers, and of course, very importantly, our employees as well, and said, right guys, what's important to you? It'd be lovely to say we gave them literally a blank sheet of paper, but we knew that probably wasn't going to serve as useful a purpose as perhaps bounding it a bit. And of course, we were able to bound it because there are plenty of references out there that suggest that if you're in a sector or you're in a type of business, what the material topics are likely to be. So we gave them a steer, and they came back with some fairly clear direction. And then of course the second stage to that, and I know you're going to put the diagram up in a minute, is then to say, okay, cool, so that's the view of our, if you like, external stakeholders. Now let's look internally as the senior team at Bradfords and assess all of those topics that they've said are important from our own view of understanding what is going to have the most impact on our business with our in-depth of knowledge of what goes on day-to-day in Bradford. So that's our material assessment, and we came up with seven topics.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back to the light touch briefly, just before, sorry, Chris, just come back to that light touch piece. So what's really interesting was that the topics that were important are mostly not topics that we don't deal with as a business every day anyway. So we did the heavy lifting to work out what those topics were. And of course, the reality is that out the back of it, we've got probably at least 5 of the 7 topics we chose. Well, we'd already got activities in place. What we hadn't done was assess them against this, kind of robust ESG framework. So in actual fact, it was a case of testing them rather than saying, actually, wait a minute, we need to do a whole load of new activity. We were already a really busy company to turn around to my senior team. By the way, we've got this strategy, and I now need to add a bucket load more to it. It's just impractical. So to find that those topics actually align with a whole load of work we're already doing means that really we're tweaking, and we're just putting a slightly different, that whole lens thing on it, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel.
And Chris, I know that Giles spoke about, there's some guidance for certain sectors, and he talked about, I'm going to paraphrase, getting the most bang for your buck. Perhaps you could just talk us through this framework that we can see on screen that can help companies in terms of determining which areas to focus on.
Yeah, we thought we'd share this today. It's not exhaustive, but often what we find is that companies, as soon as they're not carbon intensive, then they seem to think that ESG doesn't really apply to them. So there's just some example topics that fall under the E and S and G on screen. Some of them are very old topics. I mean, health and safety, which obviously for Bradfords would be a key one, and we'll see that in a minute. Is not a new topic. So some of these things, as was the case with Bradfords, Giles mentioned 5 out of 7, they're already doing something. So sometimes it's just about tying these things together and having a holistic approach to ESG and sustainability. So they're not all new topics. It shouldn't be a scary subject. I'm sure for many other companies listening, they're already doing a number of things, and it might just be that they're a bit fragmented, or they haven't really yet decided exactly why they're doing them and where they should sit in their business priorities. So if we can change slides. So as Giles mentioned, there's a very kind of structured and common sense way to go about this for any company. And that first section, the materiality assessment, is really, really the important way to start. So as Giles mentioned, it starts off by C-suite don't know everything, business owners don't know everything. So it starts off with surveying your clients, your employees, your suppliers, and your bank or your investors, to identify which of those topics that are important to them. And as Giles mentioned, there's plenty of sector information from which you can shortlist. And then once you've got that, and there's a scoring approach that you can go through. And if we go on to the next slide, you can then end up, if you look at the x-axis, so what was important to Bradford, so the Bradford's shareholders, the Bradford's management team, so they ranked them all from 0 to 5, and what was important to the stakeholders. And then you see, obviously, you focus in the top right-hand corner. So you can see that, one, you've got decarbonisation, which in the scheme of their 250-year history would be obviously a newer topic, but also you've got up there health and safety, which obviously would have been quite an old topic for them. So you can see there's a selection of topics there. They're not all E. There's a mix of E and S. And staff turnover, or colleague retention, as it's called here, especially at the moment, is quite key for many businesses. So that's how you rank them. So that's a very classic way of ranking them and making sure that you're focusing on the right areas for your business. And then in terms of how you progress from there, so if we can move on to the next slide. So once you've got that materiality assessment done, and you understand which of the topics are important to your business, it's really then just working through the next 4 steps to understand, are they significant enough to impact your business model and your strategy? Do they create risks or opportunities in those areas? Depending on how significant they are, you may need to adjust your organization structure, so to appoint someone in charge of sustainability, either dedicated or as an add-on to their role, to really drive and manage those projects, report into the board, report into the risk teams, again depending on the size of the business. What needs to happen to make it live in terms of the business and the implementation? So you've probably already got many of the policies, so it's not a blank sheet of paper. I'm sure you'll already have a health and safety policy, but maybe there's something that you need to do around decarbonisation and net zero. Maybe there's more that you need to do to bring your modern slavery policies to life and give them some depth. And then, of course, nothing happens unless we measure it. So to put in place for bonuses, for what you talk about in your monthly management meetings, to have that ESG data so you can see whether you're progressing the projects that you set out to progress. And also, so you start to collect that data for your external reporting as well, should you choose to make a sustainability report, which obviously would be wise. But the key thing is, and maybe a bit of a tip here, is don't start with your sustainability report. The sustainability report is a byproduct from you starting this journey and really attempting where and how the factors under ESG impact you.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. So Giles, Chris talked about, some of those, well, initially you talked about the 5 of the 7 that you already had in train, but with that, there is still, I assume, tweaks and changes that are needed. How, and I work in change management myself, I know how hard change can be. Perhaps you could share with us, were there any obstacles that you encountered along the way, and how did you and the wider team deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. I think two bits there really. The first was, as discussed, busy people, very busy and pretty lean top team, who inevitably were going to shoulder the, I don't want to use the word burden because it sounds bad, but they were going to shoulder the burden of owning those topics because they fundamentally sat within their functional responsibility. So the real challenge to start with was, guys, we're going to do sustainability, and the resistance based on the perception that meant that actually what we're going to do is try and cram another 20% into the 100% effort they were already putting in. So it was definitely the engagement with the senior team really important to kind of make sure they understood what we were trying to achieve here around using sustainability as a lens, as opposed to having this separate. And funnily enough, when I went around, I also went around the branches talking to them to get them on board. Very interesting. So when I said, guys, I think there's a perception in this business that this annoying bloke called Bradford's come along and said we need to do sustainability, that actually what I'm doing is saying we've got this strategy to be a basic builders merchant, but we need a strategy to be sustainable as well. And effectively said, I've got these two, and you guys are all saying, well, we don't want to, we just want the one, and trying to just and that conversation, getting that message across, absolutely had to start with the guys that were going to own those topics, well, who already owned them, to be honest. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, but we got past that, which was great. I think the other challenge, which Chris kind of alluded to earlier when talking about value and capital, is that the merchant industry, and I know the rest of the merchants won't mind me saying this, it's a very traditional industry. So we sell traditional building products to traditional tradespeople who do traditional jobs on traditional buildings. And actually, as a result, if you look deeper into kind of the way in which merchant businesses are run, there's a very understandably kind of bottom line finance heavy focus. So trying to get people to understand that financial capital needs to be balanced with the natural and the social capital. Again, just which, ingrained in certainly in financial directors' minds, in lots of people's minds, is this very pound sign driven aspect, and trying to get people to understand that there are those other two aspects, and actually those contribute to making those pound signs look better on the bottom line. That's
great, thanks, Giles. So I'm going to pick on you again, I'm afraid. So you talked there about how you set it up, how you started on that journey, the conversations you had with the leadership team and their role that they had to play in it. How have you then, we talked a lot about it being a journey. How have you then kept it alive? What have you done to keep this conversation going and for people to keep thinking and seeing and exploring new ways to do things?
So I think there are probably three answers to that question. The first is making sure that actually sustainability is, exactly as Chris said, is on the agenda. So that it's on the board agenda, it's on the senior management team agenda on a regular basis. So we sit quarterly and have a pretty robust, and I realise there'll be people on this call who don't have the same level of what's the word I'm looking for, kind of resource, because you're probably smaller businesses, but having that structure that says we've got a board, we've got a sustainability executive. So there's definitely that piece there. There's I don't want to say at the bottom of, but when I draw the diagram, they kind of sit at the bottom of that diagram. So we have sustainability champions within our business, and I haven't quite got to one per branch yet, but that's the goal. But also very keen that they're volunteers as opposed to pressed people, because we know they'll then be engaged. So those sustainability champions exist for two reasons, really. One, to be the advocates for sustainability and to take the information that those topic owners are developing and the board want dispersed into the wider business to help spread that message. But also they're a really key feedback mechanism for us to understand, kind of test the temperature around sustainability, to go out to business and say, guys, when it comes to retention, here's the data, what do you think? Tell us what it really looks like on the front line in a branch in the pouring rain in the yard when it's -3, because actually sitting in the senior management team meeting, it's actually not that often we do that, which again that's kind of basic business, basic management, right? But it's about creating those feedback mechanisms, and to a certain extent giving those sustainability champions a level of kudos, I guess, which means that they are, to a certain extent, I don't want to say put on a pedestal, but they've got some kind of credibility in the business to talk about it and have the backing to say, guys, this is important, let's talk about it. So I guess that's the first bit. The second bit, when we were working through what does our sustainability look like, what's our ESG look like, those horrible phrases, what became really clear was that you could do a whole lot of good activity that made your business more sustainable, but you could almost do it in isolation of your stakeholders, including employees. So for instance, the decision to put electric forklifts into a branch, well, the reality is that actually that's a decision that we can, the FD can make tomorrow, and stand fast lead times, the next day the chargers get installed, the diesel forklifts come out and the electric forklifts go in, and actually that's a decision that's been made centrally. But what we realized was that if you really want to genuinely maximize the business value from doing sustainability, then you've got to take everybody on that journey with you. And so I'm working on a project, and it's really exciting, that says, how do we make sure that we're sending the appropriate communication, taking people on the right journey, depending on which stakeholder group they sit in, etc., and keep them on that journey and make sure they're coming with us. What we don't want to do is get way ahead of certain stakeholder groups and then say, by the way, we've done all this, and they all go, oh, that's way too far ahead, I can't cope with that. Likewise, the ones that are saying we want more, how are we making sure we're taking them on the right journey for them as well? So that communication piece, in terms of amplifying the activity that we do, and more importantly, getting the engagement in the activity we do, is absolutely crucial.
That's great. Thanks, Giles. And Chris, do you have anything to add? Anything you've seen from other companies and what they're doing to keep that alive and to manage that change management piece?
I think, it's not any different from any other change management. And I think the key point around all of sustainability is it's not something to be scared of. It's quite common sense, isn't it? So in the same way you would do any other change in terms of updating people, what's going on, reporting back on how things are going, and just keeping it as a real topic that's part of the business, it's not any more complicated than that. Okay,
great. And to you, Chris. So we've heard some great insights from Giles. Thank you for those. And of course, as you mentioned, by technical definition, they are a large company. Is it just large businesses that need to be looking at this, or is it relevant for other businesses? And if there's anyone sat there in the audience today in a small business that hasn't started their journey, is this all relevant?
Yeah, so it's obviously not going to be at the top of the agenda for every single company, and we don't want to suggest that that should be the case and everyone should be jumping straight into it. But I think beyond large companies, there are certain groups, we'll walk through the 5 boxes in a second, that really need to be aware of how, where, when this could impact them. So the first one is those that are in the supply chain and selling to large companies. So we talked about it a bit yesterday with Giles, and I don't know if we can mention names. I won't mention the names, but we know in the building industry, one of the largest buyers is currently sending 180 questionnaire to everyone in their supply chain, which is all around ESG data collection points, because obviously they're looking to report it and they're looking to make sure that those that they're working with are sustainable, responsible businesses. The same with the UK's largest retailer, food retailer. They've got a 51 questionnaire that they're sending out to everyone, which I would say that if you haven't started your net zero journey and done your carbon footprinting, it's actually very, very difficult to answer. So we would expect that there'll be more questionnaires like that requiring data, and that over time people might be asked to substantiate the data they're providing more and more. And perhaps won't get to stay in the supply chain unless they're there. So I think if you're selling to a large, especially kind of consumer type business, it's something to be aware of if you're not already receiving those surveys. If you're selling to the government, and certainly contracts over £5 million, which are reasonably large, you need to have a net zero plan. If you're looking to raise finance, whether through a bank or private equity, because they've been mandated for a long time to redirect capital flows, certainly towards a low carbon world, because obviously they've got the money to drive the change. I think at the moment it's probably that there's more products that are available to you, because obviously you've got traditional products and newer ESG backed finance that's available to you, potentially on preferential rates. So I think that will only continue to increase. So if you're looking to raise finance over the next 2 to 3 years, it's probably a smart thing to look at. If you're selling directly to consumers, just generally for societal expectations, then obviously worth looking at, and I'm sure probably are if you're in that space. And a big one to really look out for, if you've got major customers in the EU, then the regulation there is becoming increasingly stringent. So for the large companies there, from 2024 and reporting years 2025, they're having to report under a whole new set of 13 European sustainability reporting standards, which again is not just about them as a company, it's about their ecosystem and their value chain. So again, they'll be looking to collect data from their supply chain, and probably won't be working with companies that can't support them on their sustainability journey in the long term. So I think they're the 5 things to be aware of. There'll be other UK centric, just local businesses, maybe a small accountancy firm in Devon, that maybe it's not really up there on the list. But again, you've got to remember, it's not just environmental. So for Mazars, most of our key topics are around the S, and they're about the mental well-being of our staff. They're about protecting privacy and data of our clients and our staff. So yes, obviously we've got a net zero journey because we're a large responsible company, but in terms of what's in that top right, it's all around the S for us.
That's great, thanks Chris. So just a reminder, we've had a few questions come in, so thank you for those. If you do have any more questions, then please pop them into the Q&A chat, and we will answer them in a few minutes time. But before we go to the Q&A, so there may be people on the call today that are perhaps at the very beginning of their journey, or perhaps they've not started it yet. I think we've heard the message, don't see it as something that's too daunting. What one piece of advice would each of you give to those companies that are either just started or just about to start? Perhaps I'll go to you, Giles, first.
Oh, I've got 3, but I'll stick with one. And actually, I think this one's really important, which is that universally, when I've reached out to other businesses, whether that's in our supply chain, outside of our supply chain, and said, guys, we're doing this sustainability thing, can you help? No one has said no. So reach out, ask. I think, as Chris has used the word journey quite a lot, and I know we probably, sometimes think it's all a bit over. It's probably a phrase that's overused when it comes to in modern life, but actually we are all on a journey. None of us have absolutely nailed it yet, I don't think. So I think, just reach into your supply chain. You're bound to have bigger suppliers or bigger customers who are looking at this as well. Learn from them and collaborate. And actually, the real power in sustainability, actually, if you really want to make a difference, it's about doing it in collaboration as opposed to in isolation.
Perfect, thanks. Someone on the Q&A said, can you do your other two as well? So do you want to do your 3 tips? Or
I can do, yes. So as I think it's been certainly I've said, I think Chris reinforced, sustainability doesn't mean doing lots of new stuff. It is just a lens. So I think, anyone who's sitting there going, crumbs, we just don't have the resource to do this. The answer is you're probably doing a lot of it already. So it's just about identifying that and then adding that kind of robust process lens, whatever you want to call it, on top, that makes sure that actually it tests that you're doing the right thing, and arguably makes your life easier, because you're providing something that says, right, where should we be focused, and it'll check whether you're doing the right thing or whether actually you need to look slightly differently. And then my third one really is just to make sure that the mindset is that you're doing sustainability is around adding business value. And Chris, I know, said, don't start with a report. And interesting enough, when we started our journey, you'd be amazed how many businesses said, we'll write you a report. And of course, we stepped away from that, because it's all about adding business value.
Perfect, thank you for that. And Chris, same question to you. What one piece of, or 3 if you've got them, what one piece of advice would you offer to companies that are starting their journey?
I'm going to do 2.
So go on.
I hope we've demystified it a little bit. So I think, as Giles mentioned, if you just want to start somewhere, look across your sector. There's plenty in terms of what your sector are doing, so you can narrow down those topics that they're saying is important if they've already been through the process. And I think, just to reiterate on the report, I think, the initial reaction for the last 4 or 5 years for most companies was, let's get a sustainability report out there. I think for most companies, the C-suite or the business owners would have no idea what was really in that sustainability report. It was done by the marketing team, the comms team, maybe quite a junior sustainability person. And the risk is that they're now glossy brochures that have gone out. They're not very balanced reports. They comment on, the 2 or 3 things that they've done in their communities. That they're not balanced. And if you think for sustainability reporting, it's going in the direction of financial reporting. It's supposed to be a balanced document that gives you the good things and the poor things that need improvement. And obviously, in this space, every company, no one's super proud of where they are on sustainability if they're honest. So the key thing is, once you report, you've got to report, yes, what you've done well, but what are those 2 or 3 gaps that you're really going to focus on and develop over the next 12 months? That's what your sustainability report should be. Not biting off more than you can chew, but the 2 or 3 things that you're going to focus on to make sure that in 12 months time you're a better business and you can tell your stakeholders. But don't be embarrassed, and I think it's actually really positive to reveal the gaps, because people can see the gaps. So I think just be honest in your journey, and don't jump to the reporting. Just get this, the round tables done, your stakeholder feedback done, and that's probably how you'll make most progress.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. Okay, so now going to the Q&A. So first question. So Giles, as part of aligning your employees with your sustainability strategy, have you engaged in any L&D or training activities? And if so, what did you do? Oh, you're on mute, Giles, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, there was a siren going past our office. I decided not everybody needs to hear that. So the first bit's very easy. The answer is yes. So there are a couple of bits, 3, I like 3s. What do we do? So I talked about our sustainability champions. So we quarterly meet with them, and we meet with them not only to get the feedback and kind of update them on what's going on, but actually we always add an educational element to that. It tends to be certainly traditionally focused on the E, and specifically on the E, looking downstream in our supply chain. So how are we supporting the move to sustainable building solutions? You know, what are the new products that are out there? What's going on with the existing products? That means they're now better than they were. How do they help to, you know, solve the issues around domestic retrofit, that kind of stuff. So that's part of it. We host an event series where we engage wider with the community. Again, it looks quite hard at the moment at the E and around what does the future built environment look like. But it's about, you know, getting people engaged on that journey in an arena. So if we want to talk to our customers, well, they build houses every day. So we've got to be talking in that language before we start talking to them about, you know, more of the S type stuff and perhaps the G as well. And then I guess on a really kind of basic level in the business, just spending time going into the branch, going into our branches and talking to people and actually getting them to say, you know, I think it's really interesting exercise. Come on, guys. So what is sustainability? What does it mean to you? So we've done quite a lot of that and of course that's useful to them because it helps you to, exactly as you said, Chris, to dispel the myths around it and get rid of that perception that, you know, sustainability is a separate entity to everything else. But also great feedback in order to help us understand what we do around training next. You know, where are their gaps? Where's their misconception that we need to kind of disprove?
That's great, thanks, Giles. Lots of listening from others and pressing others and getting you know, insights from others. So I can really hear it's a really collaborative journey as well that you've been through. Chris, one for you. So in the report it says that sustainability requires an education, knowledge and mindset shift. How does a company go about this in practice? How do you achieve this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mindset shift, same problem as you, is really about how you look at it. Are you looking at sustainability that it's just something that you've got to do, and therefore it's a cost, or can it bring business benefits, and you're considering it more of an investment? And actually, we've not touched on it today, but you know, there's savings to be made from sustainability as well in terms of, you know, reducing packaging, reducing waste, reducing energy use. So when we do a net zero trajectory for someone, we work with an engineering firm so they can see where the company can save energy during their processes and in their buildings and everything as well. So one, it's that mindset shift of it's just not something we have to do. Let's explore it as an investment first. Sorry, what were the other bits of your question in terms of other mindset shift? Education, and I think the education goes back to that wheel, to be honest. So when we ask, and we've even within Mazars, so we've done a roadshow to every single one of our offices to make sure that all the teams really understand that it's more than just decarbonisation. And every time we ask a Slido question, what do you think of when you think of ESG? And invariably it's only E things that come out, and 80% is just carbon. So you might get the occasional diversity and inclusion, but there's really hardly anything coming up in there. But yet when you ask them the rest of the C-suite questions, they score in exactly the same way and rank in the same way as the rest of the C-suite, which leads me to believe that if you ask the C-suite that question, you know, about what falls under ESG, most C-suites don't really appreciate what it is that we're talking about in sustainability. And therefore, until you have that education, and when you have the feedback from the stakeholders, I mean, when your stakeholders are telling you these things are most important to them, and you look across your sector at what they're doing, that's when you get the kind of light bulb moment. And once you've got that light bulb moment and people realize that there's a reason to focus on it, then the rest to an extent takes care of itself, but it just stays on the periphery of this thing that people don't really understand, which is why we're doing webinars like that, you know, like this, to really demystify and try and engage people. Yeah,
so it's about creating that safe space, I guess, in some cases, to get the C-suite into a room and be honest about what they don't know. And helping them, and it goes back to what Giles said, I guess, with, you know, getting everyone involved in it. And you know, no one's going to achieve sustainability on their own. It has to be a collaborative approach. Okay, maybe on that vein, Giles, there's a question here that says, when embarking on something new, it can be a challenge to know that you are doing the right things. How did you know that you were, and did you, collaboration comes in, have you collaborated with others to help you know that you were doing the right thing?
Cool. The first bit of that question is, yeah, coming up with a succinct answer to that is quite tricky, but I guess doing, you know, I think every company would like to go say this, but doing the right thing, I think, sits kind of at the heart of what Bradfords is all about. And when we look at our values, that's very much what it's all around. So I guess having that reference back, and actually when we went through the process of ESG, you know, values does sit right at values, and the kind of purpose of the business and kind of does sit right at the core. You know, you've got to your topics that you decide to address, the way in which you go about sustainability has to align with what the business stands for, and I think that's really important. And actually interesting, I was thinking earlier when I was talking about the history of the business, you know, if I look back at what the business used to do back in the 1800s and probably into the 1900s, we don't do so much of it now, but you know, a lot of that was sustainability. So we've got reference in the past of what doing the right thing looks like, which I guess helps. In terms of collaboration, you know, I've said that's absolutely key, you know, work with people, and we absolutely, yeah, you know, we reach out. We're very fortunate to have a very supportive supply chain who are so keen to work with us and help us on that journey, and actually very fortunate to also have a very supportive peer group. You know, we're all, as I said, we're all very traditional businesses, and we're all going, whoa, we're going to do this sustainability thing. So yeah, lots of collaboration going on there. So absolutely reaching out and sharing best practice through our trade federation, sharing best practice just through conversations and the rest of it. I think that's so important.
Great, thanks. And final question to you, Chris, probably a bit more of an internal Mazars perspective. How have staff reacted to sustainability and the drivers that we put in place within Mazars? Has it been positive? Has it been difficult to take them along the journey?
I think very positive. I think when you've got, I mean, you know, professional staff, highly educated staff, and lots of them have covered sustainability in their courses. I mean, Mazars is a very young, with the exception of me. Obviously, you're still in that young bracket, Helen. But you know, many of our staff might have graduated in the last 3 to 5 years. I don't know exactly what the stats are. So they come through and they can't actually believe that sustainability wasn't core to a business always. So certainly there's that expectation that we would be doing everything that we can in terms of the net zero journey for one, but also a lot around, you know, work-life balance and their mental health and quality and training and social mobility. So there's a big expectation there, I would say, for staff. So that wasn't our driver for doing it, but in terms of recruitment and retention, I think we'd really be struggling if we weren't fully embracing sustainability. I'm not sure if it's quite a differentiator for us, but I'd say it's kind of core to what we would do, and obviously core to what clients would expect.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked in strategy for 10 years, and in the last couple of years, that what we'd always do to help clients define what their customer value proposition is and their employee value proposition, these have now converged, and sustainability is that you know, at the middle of that. And it's like you say, it's actually a lot of the time it is a differentiator, and it's, you know, it's how you do things differently it matters a lot to people, you know, both customers, suppliers, and staff. Great. Well, that's all we have time for today. We've been through all the questions. If anyone wants to quickly put one in the next 30 seconds, then feel free. But thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like any more details on anything that we've covered, please feel free to get in touch, and you can see our contact details on the screen now. Of course, if you're an existing client of Mazars, feel free to reach out to your usual Mazars client contact, and they can connect you to us if need be. As I said at the beginning, this is the first in a series of webinars which are focusing on sustainability. The next webinar in the series is called Committing to a Sustainable Supply Chain, and that is going to be held on Wednesday, the 22nd of February at 10 AM. and that will be led by my colleague Alice Strevens, who is an Associate Director in our Human Rights and Social Impact team. And actually, we talked a little bit about supply chain today, and actually if you refer to the report where we showed you the QR code at the beginning, there's a lot in there around what the C-suite told us around the public commitment to ensuring that their businesses have a responsible supply chain. But through the webinar, we'll be exploring a bit more about what this actually means in practice. Of course, as Giles and both Chris said, you know, businesses are really expecting those in their value chain to have a sustainability strategy in place. And we'll be exploring a bit more of this in the webinar on February the 22nd. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be circulating a recording of the session and the slides to all of those who have attended, and please feel free to share with your colleagues and feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. And particular thanks to Giles. Thank you so much for being so honest and providing so many fab insights for everyone on the call. You were great. So thanks very much for that.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.